let me start a bit with making a very brief tour of what the RSD Belgium is, in case some of you don't know, or it's the first time that you are attending an event of ours. So now I will try to share my screen. It will take maybe a couple of seconds before you're able to see it. Okay, so I hope now that you are seeing my slides. If not, maybe Christophe can tell me, no, we're not seeing something, otherwise I will continue. So, as I said before, I'm Sofia, I'm the president of RSD Belgium, and I will explain to you a bit what RSD Belgium is. So, the RSG Belgium comes from the Regional Student Group of Belgium, which is a branch of the ISEB Student Council. It's a dedicated section of the ISEB. It's composed exclusively by students from all different levels and also early career researchers in the fields of bioinformatics and computational biology. So we promote the development of the community of students worldwide by organizing different events, for example, symposia, workshops, webinars, etc., hackathons, for example. And at the moment, this is an old picture actually, there are more than 30 RSGs worldwide. So if, for example, you're attending from a different country, feel free to search the regional student group in your country. It's most probable that there will be one there that organizes events for you and helps you network. So the mission of the RSG Belgium is to provide networking opportunities and bring students together from different institutes to stimulate the cooperativity and interaction between them, also to provide career skills with our seminars and our workshops, and if it's possible, to create a bridge between research and industry. So the RSD Belgium team, the board team, is composed by the president, the vice president, which is Simon Boutry, and the secretary, which is Peter Morris. And we also have our student representatives. So we have Sebastian in UCLouvain, Steen from the University of Antwerp, Joris from University of Hasselt, and Charlotte from ULB. So these are our representatives, meaning that they help communicate our events in those universities and also help host our events in the university when we are able to host them again physically. So if you have any questions regarding our organization and for some reason you cannot contact us, feel free to contact these people for further information. So about our events, we organize our annual student symposia like this one. And we are very happy to see that there is more and more participation every year. We're extremely happy for that. We recently launched a series of hackathons. So we already made 2 hackathons. They are also yearly. And they were also very successful. We received very good feedback, and we will for sure make a 3rd hackathon. We will try to do it this year. If it's not possible to do it physically, we will think of organizing an online one. We will see how we can manage it, because we think that it's very interesting for the participants. And RSG Belgium has also been involved in several other events. For example, we organized the Benelux Bioinformatics Conference, workshops along with Elixir. We are also co-organizing the Bioinformatics Students' Day in collaboration with the IB Square in Brussels. And recently we also launched a series of events that unfortunately we cannot do right now, which is called Bioinformatics. And the idea is that we create social events in its different city every time, and the bioinformaticians, students from the city can meet, can have a drink, and we will also try to have some kind of entertaining talks. So we hope that, I don't know if this will happen this year, but in the future we will be able to relaunch them again. I think it would be very nice. So we also want to organize workshops or seminars and recruitment events. If some of you have an idea of a workshop that you would like to give, or a seminar, feel free to contact us, and we can get in touch with you, and we can arrange it. So how to contact us? There are several ways. First of all, you can always visit our webpage, where we have all information about our events, the organization, our mission, and all these kind of things. And there are several ways how you can contact us. You can send us an email We are active on Twitter, on Facebook, and also we have a Slack channel where if you want to see how we organize our events, or if you want to take part in the organization of these events, feel free to send us an email and we can add you there. And of course, you can also subscribe to our mailing list. You can find this information in our website. So feel free to join us. The more people, the better. We, as you saw, we have representatives in different universities, but we still miss a lot of universities, especially in Wallonia. So if some of you would like to be a representative of RSD Belgium, don't hesitate to contact us. Also, if you would like to know more about how we organize events, to take a more active role, don't hesitate to contact us and to join our Slack channel. You're more than welcome. And also, by finishing, we would like to thank our sponsor for this event, which is the European Bioconductor Meeting, which is aimed at biologists, bioinformaticians, statisticians, programmers, and software engineers who use or contribute to the bioconductor project, or just interested in using bioconductor. And the goals are to foster the exchange of technical expertise, to keep contributors up to speed, and to coordinate any related efforts. So they are having their meeting, which is a very interesting meeting. We urge everybody to join on the 14th of December. The registration deadline is on the 7th of December. And you can find also the website that you can go to find more information. So with this, we can continue further with our program. So we are delighted today to have as a keynote speaker Professor Laurent Gatto from the Duve Institute of the UCLouvain. He's an Associate Professor of Bioinformatics and Director of the Computational Biology and Bioinformatics group. He's focusing on the processing and analysis of mass-spectrometry-based quantitative proteomics data, but today he will give a different talk. Professor Gatto is an avid open research advocate for reproducible and openly available research, which is gaining more and more importance in the field of bioinformatics and computational biology. He has published papers on this topic, stating that indeed reproducibility should be a priority. You can see his publication on list on his website. So his talk today will be on this very important topic on becoming a better scientist with open and reproducible research. So Professor Gatto, the virtual floor is yours. You can now activate your camera and your microphone, and we're happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. Could you just confirm that you can hear me?
Yes.
And I'm going to perfect. Share my slides. Here we go. Right. So I'll assume you see my first slide, and please don't hesitate to please tell me by all means if this doesn't work. So I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's really exciting for me to talk to you, and that's for two reasons. The first one is that I have the opportunity to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart. And I could carry on talking for hours and hours about open and reproducible research. But it's even more interesting, more thrilling for me, is because I'm going to talk to early career researchers, right? And you guys are the people that are going to drive this change for the better. So it's all in your hands, and I would like to give you, to share my experience and my vision of what that is. So in the spirit of kind of openness, you can get the slides at that URL. And I have also written a blog post that kind of spells out in greater details and with additional links everything I'll be talking about. And so I want to talk about my very personal experience and my personal opinions, right? I'm not here as a figure of authority, absolutely not. And one reason for that is that, authority comes through seniority, and in way too many cases, when we talk about open and reproducible research, authority and seniority do not go hand in hand with openness and reproducibility. So, very often, it's the young researchers that kind of drive this forward. Another thing I don't plan to do is kind of talk about technical solutions and how to implement open and reproducible research. I'm not going to do this because, I mean, you are probably very competent in these domains, and you'll have the possibility to interact with each other about it. And feel free to ask questions or kind of follow up thereafter over Twitter or so, if you would like to have advice on that part. But I'm not going to talk about technical solutions because I think that the real challenges are very different. The real challenges are this environment we are evolving in, the inertia of academia, and the vested interests of many senior actors. So let me start with a kind of a couple of points that I think need to be extremely clear from the very beginning. Don't be fooled by my title. Open doesn't mean good, reproducible doesn't mean good. And by good, I mean, of high academic quality. Again, this is open for discussion. What does that mean? But it's not because a piece of research is open that it's necessarily good. It's not because a piece of research is reproducible that is necessarily good. And similarly, open doesn't mean reproducible, right? At least historically, they have not been at all. Now, nowadays, they are very closely linked, very intimate, but historically, these are two very different things. Now, what I want to talk about are kind of my personal views of what I believe is or should be kind of modern, open and reproducible research. But let's not be fooled, these are not new concepts. And I was really surprised when I first heard about these Mertonian norms that were kind of laid down by Robert Merton in 1942. So kind of two fundamental principles of communism, nothing to do with the political ideology, but that's an idea that all scientists should have common ownership of scientific goods, intellectual property, to promote collective collaboration, right? It's the opposite of secrecy. Universalism, right? That the scientific validity is independent of the socio-political status of a person or any attributes of the participants. We shouldn't be interested, right? Scientific institutions act for the benefit of the common scientific enterprise and not for the personal gain of individuals or the institution itself. And we should also rely on organized skepticism, right? That scientific claims should be exposed to critical scrutiny before being accepted, both in terms of methodology, of results, but also of institutional code of conduct. And so these principles have been laid down in 1942, but to me they sound extremely, extremely modern. And so keep this in mind throughout my presentation. So let me get started with a motivating example. So I do an exam, and I get in my exam 68%, and it's absolutely trivial to get my grade, right? If I have a score of 68, my grade will be B. That's called the forward problem, and it's absolutely trivial. I don't need to think about it, I just look it up in the table. However, the inverse problem is horribly hard. If I get a B, what was my score? Inverse problems are extremely difficult. And this is exactly what we have in a kind of narrow-minded research sharing. What we get is a paper, a PDF, a static document, and really what we're interested in is what happens behind the scenes, the data, the code, the statistical model, the results. What we are supposed to do is solving an inverse problem from what is available outside, infer what happened in the lab. And that is extremely difficult. So where is the scholarship? Is it what happens in the lab, or is it what happens outside? This is a rather famous quote that says that an article about computational sciences in a scientific publication is not the scholarship. It's merely advertising of that scholarship. And the actual scholarship is the complete software, the complete environment, everything that is needed to be able to regenerate the results, the figures, the tables. Right? And that's what we want. What we favor, what we're interested in, is the scholarship. It's not only the advertisement. And you are all bioinformatics students, or at least I assume so. And this quote is specifically about computational science, but this also holds for experimental sciences. So, what is open research? And open research is something that has been constant evolution since the 17th century, with the kind of development of the publication of research in journals, development of technology and communications, investment of funders to promote open access. So it's really something in constant evolution. So, but let's try to understand what it really means. So here's a definition from Wikipedia that says open science or research. I prefer to talk about open research because I think it also applies to non-sciences. So open research is the process of transparent dissemination and access to knowledge that can be applied to various scientific practices. So it's kind of vague. So maybe if we look at this figure, we'll get a better idea of what open science means according to that definition. And indeed, we see open science, and we see that parts of open science are releasing your data openly, releasing your software openly, releasing the methodology that you have applied, releasing the outputs, the papers in open access, but also considering the peer review as being part of the dissemination of your work. And then, of course, if we consider academia, of course, education is a really big part of what we do, and so also open educational resources. But I have to say that I profoundly dislike this figure. I dislike it because it gives the very misleading impression that open research is about collecting badges or stickers, right? And the more stickers you get, the more badges you possess, the better an open researcher you are. And reciprocally, if you don't have many stickers, or if you don't have any of these badges, you aren't an open researcher, or not a good open researcher. So that kind of implicitly or explicitly exclude people if they don't collect enough badges. And if people start to believe this, that to be an open researcher is a collection of badges, well then open research becomes a stamp collection exercise. And of course, that's not what it is. Think about the Mertonian norms that I mentioned before. And incidentally, yesterday, Egon Willihagen posted this on Twitter. It's an ironic tweet, and I think this kind of exemplifies what I'm trying to say. He, until Christmas, providing tips on how to pretend to do open science, but not do it at all. Right? And that's exactly what stamp collection is. I would claim it's not open science. That's not what we are aiming for. Right? So open research can mean many different things to many different people. In particular, when declined along different dimensions. This could be technical, administrative, is your paper in the right folder, legal, with different licenses, or even philosophical attributes. And so a really important word I said before was excluding, right? As thriving open researcher, we need to realize that it's not only the distance that we travel that matters, but it's also where do we start our journey towards open and reproducible research. And not everybody will have the possibility to start at the same place, to implement things I will be mentioning, but everything you can think about, to become or to be an open and reproducible researcher. So we need to embrace open and reproducible research, but keeping in mind that we are not all equal in terms of implementing these. And we should certainly not exclude based on any definition of openness. So my first take-home message is that open isn't binary, it's a gradient, it's multidisciplinary, and it's multidimensional. And how to be an open scientist? Well, let's be open and understanding of different situations and different constraints, including our own. So I just want to briefly mention a very perverse side effect of open research and open research as a business. Lots of things are sold as being open, but I'm not convinced they are. And I think open access, a very lucrative business model, is a really good example thereof. So maybe you're already familiar with these different terms. But as a researcher, we need to publish, and there are different ways of publishing or sharing our data. There is the green open access route, where once we have written our paper, we post it on a preprint server, archive by archive, we get the DOI, and we get credit for it. And we don't need to pay anything. We simply post our papers on archive. That's something, obviously, I really like and really advise you to do. Now, journals are still really important, so there is also a gold open access route, where authors have to pay a considerable amount of money as article processing charges to be able to publish their papers as open access. Of course, that benefits for-profit publishing that typically do huge profits. And the amount of money that research need to pay, maybe not directly, maybe their funders do it, are absolutely prohibitive. Another approach called Platinum or Diamond Open Access is a not-for-profit publishing, where publishing and reading is absolutely free. And these are generally funded by universities, funders, or other research organizations. And these are funded centrally. And of course, in this publication model, the goal is to keep costs as low as possible. Obviously, that's also a publishing model that I appreciate. And very recently, you might have heard about these read and publish transformative agreements that actually kind of combine subscription fees and APCs into kind of single big deals that are paid by libraries, by universities, or by other bodies that manage these. And that's really a very horrible thing, because it kind of hides the real costs. Universities or libraries will pay huge amount of money, and part of that money is supposed to be for you to read the papers, part of that money is supposed for you to, as researchers, to publish, but nobody really knows how much money we pay for what. And that's also kind of a lock-in into these contracts with very specific publishers that will discriminate against institutions and countries that cannot afford these deals. And in the slides, but in the blog post, there is a link to a document written by Corina Logan and Dieter Lucas that describes this in greater detail. So that's an example where something is sold as being open, but in my opinion, it's not at all. There is open research and there is open research. And that's a very important section. So there is open research as something that is widely disseminated and openly accessible. Okay, we have seen that it's not quite clear what that's supposed to mean. But then there is also open science as an inclusive and welcoming environment. And indeed, unfortunately, sometimes becoming an open researcher or being labeled as an open researcher can be extremely difficult. And here we have this example of Christy that says that any step that she took to become more open, she felt attacked as for not doing enough. And that's certainly not the only example. I have also certainly felt like that. But we need to keep in mind that not everybody has the privilege to be open. Think of underrepresented minorities. We are not able, we don't have the same, we don't start from the same place. We are not able to be as open or reproducible as we want. We are not all able to be vocal about being open or not. There is a lot of discrimination that goes around this. And given the very broad view and opinions about what is open research, I think we should agree with Cameron here that says that the only thing that links all these varying strands of open research and open science generally is inclusion and diversity as a first principle, right? The primary value proposition of open science should be to be welcoming and inclusive. And I think another way of thinking about the way we disseminate our work is to think about it in terms of ethical publishing. And Corina Logan was the first person that I heard talking about ethical publishing. And the way to frame this would be to say we should think about the ethical implications of how we perform science and how we disseminate our research. And I have to admit that the first time I heard the phrasing, I was not convinced about whether ethical was the right term, but I have come to the realization that it's actually spot on. So if we are unsure about what open science means, well, maybe thinking about it in terms of ethical aspects will bring us a way forward. So why would you want to become an open research practitioner? Well, you might argue that it's the right thing to do, but the right thing to do is not necessarily the thing that you want to do, because sometimes doing the right thing is hard. But there are actual benefits for your academic career. Open access articles get more citations, open publications get higher coverage, data availability that is associated with an increase in citations, openly available software is used more often, and you can also benefit from institutional support, right? If you need help to work openly, reproducibly, very often in your institutions you have dedicated people that can come and help you. Being an open researcher also opens networking opportunities. And in May last year, I gave a very similar talk in Delft, where I was invited by a former colleague and friend of mine in Cambridge. So we were in Cambridge and she moved, and then she invited me to give a talk. So this creates, I think, very beneficial networking opportunities, which are important in what we do. But also get more funding. You need to meet funders' requirements, and these become more and more linked to openness of your research. But some funds, like some of the Wellcome Trust Fund, the Open Research Fund, are kind of specifically dedicated to open research. And then, get that promotion. Open research is increasingly visible and recognized in promotion and tenure. Now, it's not always the case, of course, but there is movement in that direction. So I honestly believe that there are benefits in being an open researcher in terms of career. But so, are there any risks? Does it take more time to work openly? It's difficult to say, because you can't do both simultaneously. But I would say, isn't it worth investing time in managing data and everything you produce in a way that others, and that includes your future self, can find and understand it? Right? I think that's extremely important for anyone that wants to build a career in research, whether you're a group leader or not. Will you be able to build this corpus of data, software, research, and everything where your future self and other lab members can find and reuse? Now, are senior academics always supportive? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Is there a risk of being scooped? I don't know. But there certainly is a benefit of with releasing your outputs very early and get credit thereof. But there is one really important thing, especially if you interact with senior scientists that are not necessarily convinced. That's that working openly and reproducibly, working with that mindset doesn't mean you have to release everything prematurely. No, it means that you manage your research in a way that you can find data and you can find your results at every stage. That also means you can repeat or reproduce your results, you can rerun, compare them with new data, different methods, different parameters, and then when the time comes, you can release the data, only parts thereof. So working with openness and reproducibility in mind doesn't mean giving everything away. It means being prepared. Are there any risks? Well, I wouldn't say there are risks of being an open researcher, but wanting to do open research can sometimes lead to difficult situation where some researchers, and we have collected some testimony as part of the Bulletin to Bad Science campaign, sometimes feel bullied because they can't express their desire of being open as they wish. So yes, these things exist. I don't think they're actual risks in terms of career, but it's not always the easiest part. So now you might wonder, well, why is it not all open, right? Or in other way, when will open science become science? If we don't say open science, does it mean that it's closed science? And there are aggravating circumstances. This, I think, is a kind of very revealing paper by Richard Alrath, and I'll cite him at the very end again. The paper says the following thing, that poor research practice and design and poor data analysis lead to false positive findings. And such poor method persist despite calls for improvement, right? So we know that these things happen, but they keep on happening, suggesting that they result from something more than just misunderstanding, right? The persistence of these poor methods results partly from incentives that favor them. So there is some kind of natural selection for bad science or bad science practice. So what are these incentives? Well, here's one example. Incentives for being an open researcher, for open career progression, aren't there yet. Or maybe they are there, but they are not always followed or fully implemented. If we think that research is the byproduct of researchers getting promoted, right, getting a new next job, well then, and that's a very honest question, shouldn't we, as early career researchers, focus solely on the promotion, and being a docile academic citizen, do what your senior peers have done, rather than aiming for change, for maybe a more noble cause of pursuing research to understand the world around you and do it openly? So I think that's a very honest question, and you need to ask yourself, what is doing research, and to what extent should your beliefs in how to do research get in the way of getting a promotion? Or maybe your beliefs in doing open research could also promote these your career. It's not always one or the other. But I mean, there are also really good incentives or good efforts, like the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, DORA for short, that really tries really hard to improve ways in which outputs of scholarly research are evaluated. They want to, in a nutshell, make clear that if we want to assess research and researcher, we should not get stuck with impact factor and journal titles. Right? There are better ways to assess the quality of research, and that includes also open research and reproducible research. So, in my opinion, the barriers to open research are not technological, but they are social, cultural, and political. There is systematic control and inertia in academia. There are vested interests by people in charge, and there is sometimes abuse in power dynamics. These things are there. Unfortunately, that's a fact. Sometimes minimal, sometimes more important. But there are also lots of fears, and in my opinion, they are mostly perceived fears. So let's move to reproducibility. And why is it important? Well, first, for scientific reasons, right? Think about the crisis, the reproducibility crisis, but also for political reasons. We need to trust in science. Think of the current situation. Lack of public trust in science leads to poor public health decisions, right? So we need this public trust in science, in research, and in experts. But briefly, what do we mean by reproducibility? And there are different levels. I might be able to repeat my own experiment, reproducing the table, graphs, figures, and so with the same setup, same data, same software in the same lab and same computer. It sounds easy. It's not always the case. I can reproduce an experiment, not mine, getting the same tables and so on, in a different lab, different computer, using the same setup. That's already better. Again, it's not easy at all. I can replicate an experiment, same results or similar enough, table, graphs, and results in a different setup. that becomes sometimes very difficult. And then there is kind of the next level, which is reusing information from one experiment to run a completely new one, a new experiment to, for instance, confirm results from scratch. So we have these different levels in reproducibility. And here's a kind of another table that shows something very similar. But so why is, we have seen that reproducibility is important for science at large, but why is it important for me as an individual researcher? And I invite you to go and look at Gabriel Becker's presentation, Imperfect Guide to Imperfect Reproducibility. But his point is that computational reproducibility, or reproducibility in general, is not the point. We don't really care about being able to reproduce things just for the sake of reproducing them. We might reproduce nonsense. But rather, reproducibility, the goal of this is trust, verification, and guarantees, right? Trust in reporting, the result is accurately reported. Trust in an implementation, the code successfully implements chosen methods. The code does what it's supposed to do. Statistical trust, scientific trusts. So there is this gradient of levels of trust and reproducibility that we can implement, sometimes easily, sometimes it's extremely difficult. So similar take-home message, reproducibility isn't binary, it's a gradient, it's multidisciplinary, it's multidimensional. And reproducibility isn't easy at all, depending on what you're aiming for. But there are more reasons to work reproducibly. And Florian Markowitz says it, I think, very eloquently. Fellow researcher, ask not what you can do for reproducibility, but ask what reproducibility can do for you. You can work reproducibly for very selfish reasons. First of all, reproducibility avoids disasters. Right? You don't want to publish false positives. And making sure you can reproduce your results, you know exactly what happens, can save you from embarrassing disasters. Reproducibility makes it easier to write papers. You know exactly how you produce the figure, and you can update it when you get new data. One major hurdle in publishing your work is to convince reviewers. Well, if they are not quite sure if what you say is correct, if you give them the possibility to reproduce your results, it will be much easier to convince them. Reproducibility enables continuity of your work, right? In Florian's group, they say, or he says, he doesn't even discuss results with students if they are not documented well. And finally, reproducibility helps to build your reputation as a researcher. Now you could wonder, does it take more time to work reproducibly? Well, several people, including me, think no, it's just a matter of relocating time. Instead of wasting more time at the end, after trying to publish your paper, you invest that time at the very beginning of your project. So what can you do to be an open researcher? Very quickly, preprints, I think, is a really useful tool that we have. Think about also peer review, open peer review, or when you evaluate research, think about the methods. Are they sound? Are they valid? If not, can you really trust the results? Whenever you produce data and when you share data, will others be able to find them, to access them, to reuse them, make sure that whatever you produce is interoperable with other systems, other data? Think about open peer review, and that doesn't only mean signing your reviews, which is certainly quite difficult as early career researchers, but think of when you write reviews, that's entirely part of the process of releasing or disseminating our research. And very recently, eLife have mentioned that they're going to implement the publish then review model, and I think that is really groundbreaking. From July on, eLife will only review manuscripts that are already published as preprints, and they will focus their whole editorial process on producing public reviews to be posted along the preprints. That is absolutely amazing. And I'm not sure if reports are very relevant in bioinformatics, but one way to do research is to define your data collection, your analysis protocol, your hypothesis, and get that reviewed. And if that's reviewed, that's great, because then your paper gets reviewed, irrespective whether it's positive or negative. Review is on data collection and the data analysis method, and does it fit your hypothesis? A last piece of advice that is extremely, extremely important, and that is make allies, make friends. Other early career researchers, librarians, they have a really good understanding that we don't have as researchers. Data champions or stewards that are there to support managing your data in your institutions. Research software engineers. Try to network online and offline. I mean, collaboration, cooperation is, in my opinion, a very core principle of open and reproducible research. And again, let's think about the Newtonian norm of communism. So, final food for thought, because there is still a long way to go. If you think about how research is done, it's actually an antiquated process. I'm not sure if irrespective whether you're a computational biologist, whether you're a cancer biologist, whether you work in the lab in front of your computer, very often the way research is done is the way research was done 20 years, right? The process of doing research is not well defined, as opposed to software development. Software development, whether you develop a research software, an app for a phone, the process of doing a research is extremely well defined. Continuous integration, versioning, unit testing, integration testing, documentation, automatic generation of this documentation. So the process of software development is really well defined, whereas the process of doing science is kind of amateurish, is very, very amateurish. And I think that one way to get into the right direction, into what does it mean to be open, what does it mean to be reproducible, is to try to think about how software development works. Maybe we can use the tools. I definitely believe we can use the tools in computational sciences, but also some of the processes. How can we apply some of the processes to our everyday research? And I think that also applies to experimental work. And there is a link there to a talk by Richard McAlrath, which is really, really interesting. And another real point, especially as early career researchers, is build a brand as an open and reproducible researcher. There is a link to a blog post by Stephanie Hicks that was posted yesterday that I think is really, really important. Right nowadays, to be a researcher is not only about doing your work on your own in your office. You need to promote what you do, and if what you want to do is open and reproducible research, you should definitely brand yourself as an open researcher. Couple of conclusions. If you're in a position to do it, go ahead. Build openness and reproducibility at the very core of your research. Again, according to your possibilities. And don't wait. Don't wait, because being open and reproducible isn't something that works as an afterthought. It's important to think in advance about what do you want to be able to achieve in terms of openness and reproducibility, and how can this improve the quality of your research. Think ahead if possible, and then try, depending on the opportunities you have, to implement it. Right, standing on the shoulders of giants, well, that really only makes sense in the context, I think, in my opinion, of open and reproducible research. If you are here, if you're listening to this, it probably means that you have an interest in these concepts, and I think that that's the right way to get started. But it's a long path, and I think it constantly evolves. It's not stamp collection, and it will be dependent on your personal circumstances that might change over time. So be creative and implement what works for you, and implement what you would like the future to be. But don't forget, open science is, of course, trying to disseminate our research in an open and accessible way, but never forget that open science should be, it's not always the case, should be an inclusive and welcoming environment. If there is only one thing that you should try is to strive for inclusivity and welcoming environment to increase diversity. And so one of my tips was to make allies, to make friends, and I have been extremely lucky to meet some really wonderful allies and inspiring friends over time. Here are some of them: Corina Logan, that I mentioned already, Stephen Aglin, from whom I borrowed the inverse problem example, Marta Tabarek, that invited me in Delft later on. She was working as a data manager, Kirsty Whittaker, that inspired the table of same data, different data. Chris Hartgening, that I didn't name explicitly here, but that is doing really interesting things in terms of liberating your research. Naomi Penfold, that was first a researcher in Cambridge, and then she worked for eLife, and then for ICEP for the preprints. And Yvonne Nobis, a librarian in Cambridge, that has provided really illuminating insights into the publishing business from a librarian's perspective. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really happy to answer any questions if you have some.
Thank you very much. It was a very, very interesting talk. And it's very important also. It's gaining more and more importance nowadays. I see this topic discussed a lot on social media, and I think it's really important that we talk about this. So we have a couple of questions. I will try to address as many as possible. Please write them in the questions tab. So the first question is, what do you think about free publishing and reading, but where the costs are paid by the inclusion of advertisements?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand. The costs are paying by advertisements, as in there is a journal and companies pay for advertising their products, and that should be a way to subsidize researchers publishing their research. Is that what is meant?
Christoph, you can, yes, that's what he means. That's what he means.
So I think we need to agree that there is a cost in publishing. It's not done for free. The cost can be very, very low. I think publishing, the cost of publishing a preprint or bioarchive or archive is very low, maybe a couple of dollars or so. But of course, we might want to have more elaborate support or infrastructure, and that certainly comes at a cost. And we need to find the money. So I definitely think that this should be not-for-profit publishing business. If one way to get money is by being sponsored by companies that want to advertise their products, I don't think that's a problem. As long maybe as these products are in line with, research, kind of the principles of good research and science. I'm not quite sure I would like to publish in a journal that has advertisement for kind of random nonsense or homeopathy, or I don't know. That would certainly make me feel uncomfortable, but I don't think that is something that we should exclude, because we need money to be able to publish. And again, it's not about publishing only our papers, but also publishing our data, our software, our pipeline. So this can come at some cost, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from Caroline. She thanks you very much for your interesting talk. She said it's an eye-opening way of approaching research. So she wanted to ask if you could explain the concept of ethical publishing a bit more, and also, is it possible to get access to these slides?
Yes. So let me see. Let me move back to the very beginning. So here, these are the short links where you get access to the slides and to the blog post. And from the blog post, you also have access to the slides. So ethical publishing, unfortunately, Corina is not here. She could define it maybe in more specific terms. But I think as researchers, we can think about, is what we do ethical? And of course, the notion of ethics will be dependent on where you come from, your your kind of cultural background, but is it in line with what you believe is the right thing to do? So let's say we have a really nice piece of research and we would like to publish it in a kind of glamorous journal because we believe that that will attract more interest from the readers. Do we think that paying 9,000 euros, 9,000 euros, we can pay research for that? We can pay internships. We can send many students at international conference with that. Is it ethical to pay 9,000 euros? That's the latest figure. It came out, it's regarding to Nature Publishing Group, but, or 5 or 6, 7, 8,000 euros. Are we ready? Do we think it's ethical to spend that money to publish our papers, given that we as a society have already paid for the research itself? As researchers, we have reviewed the paper. As a society, we have paid to train these researchers, right? Are we still happy? Do we think it's worth paying that amount of money? Well, I think one way to look at this, to try to answer that question, and we can have different answers, is to approach it in terms of ethics. Another way to see it is, do we need to pay to be able to publish our research? Is this ethical? Some people will easily be able to pay 5,000 euros to publish their paper. Some other labs in other countries will never be able to pay that amount of money to publish their research. Does it mean that their research is not as good? Of course not. It's just a matter of finances. Is this ethical? Is this the kind of research environment we want to live in? So I think the concept of ethics can help us as individuals refocus to, what are we accepting to do? Are there things that we don't want to get involved with? It's a way for each individual to put things into context.
Okay. The next question is from Maria. Do you see funding bodies and charities that provide grants recognizing and moving on this open science direction already?
Yes and no. Yes, but maybe the way they do it is not always what I would consider the right thing to do. So a good example is the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and they have an open science fund, right? So it's people submit their research, the research proposal are public, and their research or the project needs to be related to open research, and they get funding to do exactly that. So that's, I think, really great. I think something that was catastrophic in terms of funding bodies is paying for open access fees, these APCs. At least that was the way it was when I was in Cambridge. We published the paper, we had some APCs to send, to pay. We simply send a message to the central library saying, here's the paper, it needs to be published. And we had to do that, right? Because the funders required us to publish the papers open access. And so it's all normal. It happens without researchers even thinking about it, that 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 pounds or euros are paid to publishers. That is something that was mandated by funding bodies. And of course, the idea was to facilitate a transition from a purely subscription model to an open access model. But that had a really perverse incentives or result is that open access became a business. Another way where there is a requirement for open access, well, I think the requirement for open access should not be linked to paying APCs, right? Requiring researchers to pay or to publish open access, fine. That's only the tip of the iceberg, as we have seen. The paper is the advertisement of the scholarship. So I would prefer that more efforts are put in terms of releasing software, releasing data, promoting, other aspects of open research, which is much more difficult to do. It's quite easy to enforce people to publish open access, although I'm not sure that all funding bodies check it, and say, oh, we gave you money to publish this, it's not open access. That's not that easy to do. There are other ways around this, but somehow we're only scratching the surface. So there are efforts. I am not sure that these efforts are enough.
Yes, it's understandable. Okay, then maybe we have a time for a last question. So it's from Kian Yu from UCLouvain. So the question is whether data security would be a challenge or obstacle for open science.
Of course, depending on the type of data that you have, if there is personal data, that needs to be taken into account. Absolutely. And so that doesn't mean releasing personal information where you can link the data back to the patient. Absolutely. Medical data, we need to be extremely careful. So that's certainly a challenge that needs to be tackled at the very beginning, and we need to be careful with that. And that's certainly not an area where I'm an expert in. However, I'm sometimes a little bit puzzled by researchers that put this forward, as a way to control opening data, when in our everyday life we release shitload of personal information using our phones and social media, right? So sometimes I'm kind of wondering if personal aspects of the data, of course we need to be careful, but I think that's something that we need to tackle on a day-by-day basis. And I don't think it should be taken as a general reason for limiting openness and kind of dissemination of the data.
Okay, yes, because I'm also working with genomic data from patients, for example, and I know that it can be really difficult sometimes. Yeah, we cannot provide really a lot of information that can be accessed publicly. It's not possible. So it's
absolutely. But as I said, working openly doesn't mean disseminating everything. You can work in a way that you could disseminate it if you have the possibility, if you have to. But so if you think at the end, oh, I need to distribute my data. Oh, but it's private. Of course, that the problem is, that's not the right way to tackle it. I think we need to think in advance about the process of working openly and reproducibly, and then if we can release it, we do it. But if we only think about releasing data at the end, we have the wrong end of the stick.
Yes, I understand.
And maybe just last 30 seconds. I don't want to sound kind of pessimistic about openness and reproducibility. I think it's really great. Sometimes it's very hard too when you don't get the support, the direct support that you would like to. But I certainly don't want to seem too pessimistic. I think there are wonderful opportunities in pursuing openness and reproducibility.
Yes. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk. We had a lot of questions to answer.